you're so keen. So thank you for coming. This is our second last tea and tale of the season. My name's Nikki. I'm the curator at the museum here. And our theme this year is myths and legends. I want to start this program too by acknowledging that the program is taking place in the unceded territory of the Lil'wat Nation. We're doing the theme of myths and legends this year because Pemberton is 160 years old this summer as a place name on European maps. It is and has been a traditional territory of the Lil'wat peoples for thousands of years before this. Myths and legends tend to be some of the oldest stories we can hear about the past, and they often give us a lot of information about these days of long ago. A myth tells us why things are the way that they are. A legend tells us how we were. We'd like to thank all of the volunteer bakers who've made our summer a success. The baking was fantastic again today. And we also want to thank all of our local presenters who've taken the time to support the program and made some journeys up the highway to get here. And thank you to all of you for coming and supporting the program. Next week is our last tale. We have Professor Matthew Unger. He's from Concordia University, and he'll be presenting some highlights from his research into the local legend of the Tom Pool murder. And you can find the lineup on our website, and if you missed a tale, our recordings are on the website. And just a reminder that we do film these for the record. Today we have Diane Mitchell and Marshall Tichauer, who will be telling us about the legendary copper mine at Britannia. In its 70-year life, the Britannia mine had a fascinating history, with over 60,000 people living and working there. You can imagine there's a few stories to tell. With a background in geology, Diane spent 12 years working for the National Museums of Scotland in both curatorial and education roles, before moving to BC to take up the position at the Britannia Mine Museum in 2007. Diane's responsible for overseeing the development and implementation of school and education programs, including exhibits. And she was just telling me they see 70,000 people, 76,000 people a year in Britannia. She also oversees collections management of geology specimens, archives, and mining artifacts. So she's very busy, and we're very grateful that she's here today. And Marshall worked at Britannia Mine from 1965 to 1974, so he'll be able to give us a real insider's view. And he held many jobs at the mine, including captain of the mine, rescue team, and FA team. Today he provides guided tours at the Britannia Mine Museum. We're honored that you guys could come and join us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for inviting both of us to speak here today. So it's not often we'll get to kind of leave the museum site and come out and meet other people and chat, so it's great. The Britannia Mine has been around for a long time, and when the mine closed down in 1974, it was only a matter of months before the museum opened up, and it was begun by the Britannia Beach Historical Society that really wanted to preserve the history of the mine, and so they got the ball rolling. Industry kicked in, and so, you know, fast forward 40 years and we have the Britannia Mine Museum today. Just can I see a show of hands, has anyone been through the museum? A few people yes, and a few people no. So what we try to do is really just try to talk about the social history of the museum, just the story of the mine, but also how mining has changed and how it has impacted both Britannia and, you know, society in general over the years. And so the remediation, the environmental side of it is a big part of what we do. And so we'll touch on that later, as Marshall mentioned. But, you know, this is myths and legends, and so there's quite a few stories, and some more recent ones. Marshall is a great storyteller, and some going back years. And so, you know, my job over the last 11 years, it's been fascinating seeing so many of the stories come through, and it's like some of them we don't know if they're real or not, but they're good stories. And occasionally, I was just saying to Nikki earlier that, you know, there was a story that was told for when I started about something that happened in the big mill building a few months ago, I was able to completely disprove that story. So, but the stories and what we tell here today is to the best of our knowledge. It's true as we can give you. So the Britannia Mine and the Britannia Mountains and Britannia Beach were named after the HMS Britannia, the 18th century British battleship. I don't think I've ever seen anything that says why it was named after Britannia, but indeed it was. So, which down? Is that right? So, just to give you a little bit of background of where we are. So the highway today follows through here. You'll spot the mill building, which as you drive down to Vancouver, you can't really miss that building. Most people, when they drive through Britannia, have no idea what was there in decades gone and past or in the last century. But this is such a great shot. It was taken in about 1960, and so it shows Britannia Beach down here. So this was one of the town sites, and then tucked up in the back here was the Mount Shear town site, and so that was another one of the main mining operations, the main mining town, so I'll talk a little bit about that later. And then dotted about the place there was a few mining camps as well. There was one up here, the Daisy Camp, there was Halfway Camp, there was Jane Basin over in the Furry Creek side, there was other camps there. And so this was where the whole of the mining operations took place, and it was a huge operation over the course of the mine. So as you drive through today, the intersection is just right about there. So the creek comes here and the intersection's there. And Galileo Coffee is around about here, just to kind of give you a modern day sense of what's there. The line that you see here is the old incline skip railway that took, and then the railway that took people into Mount Shear. So there was a lot of infrastructure, there were a lot of people, and with that a lot of stories. And then the Jane Basin, which was a big glory hole or a big open pit. Can't see it, but it was just tucked way in the back there, so up about 3,000 feet. So that's the place. So the first story about Britannia is really how Britannia came about, and so we have Dr. Alexander Forbes to thank for this. The story of how Britannia came about came from him in an article that he did, an interview he did probably about 30-40 years after his supposed discovery. So the story goes that in 1888 he was contacted by a man named Granger, who came to him and said, I have discovered copper mineralization, maybe gold, up on the mountains. And so he offered he asked for $400 in exchange for showing Dr. Forbes where this was. Now, Dr. Forbes was a physician, hailed from my home country of Scotland, and he was a physician that worked around Howe Sound. So Granger took him off into the mountains, clambered all over the mountains, could not see anything. The story he tells is that on their way back down the mountain, he shot a buck. And the buck, in its dying moments, its flailing hooves scraped away some moss off the rock and showed mineralized rock, showed the sparkly mineral rock. And that is what he says is how it was found. And so he says the first person to discover the ore was Granger, the second was Mr. Buck, and the third was himself. This is the story that he tells many years later. So he spent about 8 years prospecting. He was up there, but he was looking for gold because back then nobody was interested in copper. So he prospected, he didn't find any gold, he didn't make any claims to the land, and then he lost interest because he wasn't finding gold. And so it wasn't until about 10 years later that another man, a trapper called Oliver Furry, took an interest. And so he went over there and he started making claims, he talked to investors, he got interested in it, and that's where things really started to take off. So by 1900, there was investors interested, there were claims made. Oliver Furry took off into the sunset, and that's who Furry Creek is named after. And so that's when investors started to take interest, and development work started, they are very early 1900s. And so the ore was discovered way up high in the mountains. And so there was pack train or horse trails up into the mountains, there was log cabins, there was an early camp set up called Jade Camp. on one of the early claims in development work to start this work, and so that was really the start of the mine. 1904 they had a mine as such. They started production, but it wasn't until 1905 that the first shipments of copper were made. So this is an early photo of Britannia Beach. The intersection is probably somewhere, today's intersection probably somewhere around about here. The very early Britannia Beach, it had a post office by 1907. This building up here is the original mill building which processed the ore. There was a hotel, there were company houses, there was a store. And then the mine, where the glory hole was way kind of tucked up in the back. The only way up to the mine was by pack train, by horses or by foot. And so, yeah, this was the beginning of it. And the shoreline is actually very different from today as well, so there's been infill over the years. So John Weatherford Dunbar Moody, quite a mouthful, but he was quite a man, so he came on board in 1911 as the general manager. And he was, as the story goes, he was a tyrant. He was not a popular general manager. But he did good work, and he turned the mine around. They had many, many problems to begin with, to do with production, to do with the technology, to do with the investors. But he turned it around, and he made it start a profitable mine. But some of the stories about him was like his favorite line was "Pack up and get out of town." He was a dictator. He was an autocrat. There was a company store there, and so apparently he did not like you buying anything unless it was at the company store. So you could not take the steamship to Vancouver, buy yourself something and bring it back into town. If he found you out, you had it. So this is Britannia Beach before 1921. So this is probably about circa 1917, 1918. And so again, so the mill building today sits on this slope here. And the lights, the intersection lights that you go through today, is around about here. So the big building that you see was the company store, this one over here. And this building here is the second mill. So the mill was the building where they processed all the ore that was coming out of the mine. The first mill became too small for what they needed, so they built a larger mill, mill number 2. So the houses, the residents lived very close, basically right next to all the industrial operations. And yeah, the biggest non-industrial building was the company store, where you had to buy anything and everything if you wanted to. And one of the lines is owing your soul to the company store. So reportedly, the women would have the paycheck spent before the paycheck came. The wives would have the paycheck spent before it came through. So yeah, quite a bustling community. The only way in or out was by steamship. And so they really had quite a tight-knit community. The only people that lived here were those that worked for the mine. It was a company town. But it wasn't all good days. It wasn't all a bustling community. Up in the high up in the mountain, in the Jane Basin at the Jade Camp, this was the original mining camp. There was a terrible disaster in March 1915 called the Jane Slide. So just after midnight on March 1st, 1915, a rock and snow slide took out the camp, the Jane Camp. It was probably had about 300 employees at the time. There were families that lived up there, and yeah, you can see the aftermath. So there were about 56 people killed. I've seen different numbers. Again, legend, I've heard 66, 57. We've never been able to kind of pin down exactly how many people, because there's different accounts in it. So it was a terrible night. The phone line, there was no phone line. It was taken out, so somebody had to run down to get help, and so the steamship came from Vancouver within about 24 hours. So it was a terrible loss of life. And so after that, they really realized that this was just too high in the mountain. It was too dangerous for them to be living. So the camps were moved further down the mountain, and so what was a tunnel camp became the Mount Shear town site, so it was nestled in the valley and a lot safer. So that was just one of the disasters to befall Britannia. So next comes Carlton Perkins Browning, and I can never say his name without tripping up my tongue. So C.P. Browning is how he's referred to. And whereas Moody was the tyrant and the autocrat, C.P. Browning was the complete opposite. He was a benevolent, beloved manager, and he managed the mine from 1922 through to late 1940s, I think was when he left. And he really did, he built community. And Britannia, you know, the people that lived at Britannia, you know, Marshall will testify to this, they loved their time there. This was a true community. It was a huge community spirit, you know, everyone looked out for each other's kids, they could trust each other, never lock their doors. And although it was a company town, C.P. Browning was responsible for building that, you know, recreational amenities. He understood that if you want to attract good people and keep good people, you need to look after them. So in his tenure, there was so many recreational facilities. So there was swimming pools and tennis courts and a movie theatre, and there was dances. There was any excuse for a party, for a get-together, you know, be it Burns Night or Christmas or Halloween or you name it. So it really was a strong community. And so C.P. Browning took the mine through the Depression and survived just. And by 1930, Britannia hit their peak years. And so at, you know, one time it said that the mine was producing about 17% of the world's copper at the time, and one of the largest copper mine in the then British Empire. So it really was a good going concern, and a lot of it is largely thanks to Browning. So 1921 was a very, very dark year for Britannia, and this was C.P. Browning's second year. There's a building just kind of tucked off here, and you can see this big building here, the big store. So this is the big store here, and I just want to, so this building here survived it. So 1915 they had the Jane slide, which killed at least 56 people. 1921 there was, in March, there was a fire on Mill 2. So,
no, there was no picture.
Yeah, so this building burnt down. There was nobody working in it at the time, it was at night, so nobody was killed, but it was disastrous because without any mill they could not process any ore. Without being able to process ore, they could not ship it off. Without that, they could not pay their staff. So it was a huge, huge blow, and so when Mill 2 burnt down, they basically had to stop production and focus on recovery. That was in the March. And then in October, a log jam on one of the creeks up the mountain after torrential rain burst, and so it caused a huge flood that took out basically this lower portion of the beach. The creek changed direction and all these houses were gone, and so what we had left was the disaster here. So 36 lives were lost that night. It's often said that it was 37 lost, but one of the men had died in an industrial accident on the same day. So 36, again, men, women, children were taken out by the slide. Some of the houses were washed out into the Sound. There's amazing stories, however, of recovery and rescue, and you know, a baby being rescued off one of the houses. Everyone pulled together. It was their darkest year by far, but they were resilient, they had resolve, and they were determined to continue. So they rebuilt. They did not build houses on the same floodplain. They also started planning for a new mill building because they needed that mill building in order to sell their cotton fruit. Oh,
This building here is still here.
yeah.
That's the administration building we have in Britannia. That was the main office when I was here.
So again, you can see here's the store. And so by 1923, they opened up Mill 3. So this is the building that still stands today. It was built of steel and concrete, so back in the early 1920s that was advanced for the time. They did not want a building that was going to burn down again. It's said that architects and engineers came from the world over to see this building, that it really was quite impressive. And you can see the results. This was where Mill 2 sat, there was a fire there. And so there's still examples of that today. When you're on the museum site, you can see where Mill 2 was, and you can see some of the old equipment just buried in the hillside. This was Britannia post 1923. It was a customs port of entry into the town, and this building here is the administration building, so we still have that on our site. It's moved 3 times. And I got to tell you, as someone moving from Scotland, seeing buildings move, it's quite something, because that just doesn't happen where I come from. So through the 1920s, the 1930s, they survived the Depression. They thrived in the early 30s, and they came back and they built a very, very strong community and successful mine. The World War II years were tough, as they were for any of the communities. The biggest story that came out of World War II was the Japanese internment. There were Japanese workers at Britannia since the early years. Being on the coast, they were not immune to the internment. So Pearl Harbor was December 1941. By May 1942, all the Japanese residents in Britannia were shipped off and shipped out. There are stories of friendships that were broken. There's also stories of there being little sympathy and rumours of radios up in the backcountry, etc. So after everything was all resolved, they never came back. Britannia definitely suffered from that. Also being on the coast, they had the Pacific Coast Militia Rangers because there was fear of attack coming in through the coast. So the war years were tough, but being a mine and producing copper, there was also a need for copper in the war effort. So it was another interesting times for Britannia. So the post-war years, things are moving on. The next biggest change came in the 1950s. So you can see here the PGE railway, and there's a car. This was a huge thing for the community. Up until 1956, the only way in or out of Britannia was by steamship. And it was a highlight. So when the steamship came in, everyone was down there to meet it. You wanted to go for a day to Vancouver, you were on the steamship. So 1956, we had the railway came through. 1958, the highway came through, and many people at that time said that was the beginning of the end. Because after that, the men on weekends, they got time off, they could go off to Vancouver. And so it was the end of community. And so although it opened up a different life to people, it also signalled the start of the end for the community. It's quite interesting just to hear how that real kind of difference of opinion. You'd think, well, the highway coming in is fantastic, but yeah, it wasn't such a good thing as you might believe. So this is the Mount Shear town site. So this is the town site that today has quite a bit of mystique, I think. Would you agree?
Yeah.
Town site has mystique. Because it had a post office, it needed a name, so it's called Mount Shear. To everyone who lived there, it was the town site, and Britannia Beach was the beach, and you were either town site or beach. The town site was actually a larger town and a larger community than Britannia Beach. The town site was where the miners lived. The beach was where a lot of the surface and the mill workers lived. So the town site, even though they're way back in the valley there, and probably about 1,000 feet up, or no, at least that, and more like 2,000 feet. They had, the high school was there, they had an elementary school, they had a hospital with operating theatre, they had a store, they had swimming pool, they had movie theatre. It was a fully functioning town. When the mine closed in 1958, temporarily, the town site was emptied of people. And then when the mine reopened in 1959, they said, we don't need the town site anymore, our operations are not big enough to warrant having this town, and so that was the end of the town site. Shortly after that, the buildings were burnt to the ground because they were afraid of squatters moving in. Some of the houses were rescued. We actually have one of our houses on the museum site that was taken from the town site, put on a barge, put round to Manatee Bay, and then came back many years later. But some of them suffered this fate here, which is quite sad, that there's so little left. But what the mystique that's left is people, if they hear about the town site, and so the museum, they come and they ask us about it, and they want to go up there. Now, nature has taken back. You go up there and you would hardly ever know that there was buildings there. But there's little things that you can see, like the swimming pool is still there. So you go and you bushwhack and you find the swimming pool, which is really strange. And then there's a little bit of the ball field, like, you know, the bleachers, there's not much left. And I've never seen them, but apparently some of it, there's daffodils that are going through the forest from people's gardens. And there's people that, you know, they get in touch with us to get access because they want to go and scatter ashes of their family up there. You know, parents and grandparents that lived up there. There's the old powerhouse, there's a few things left, but yeah, it's amazing how quickly nature has reclaimed there. So there's definitely a lot of interest in the town site. Anaconda ears. There you go. This is Marshall's.
Okay, so we're going to talk about the anaconda ears. Anaconda came on board, they bought it in '63. Like I was telling you, I was an 18-year-old kid looking for a job. You know, car club. Looking for a job, got a job in a mine. Completely raw, green kid. In 1965, I was making $300 a month. Not bad. The beer parlor was 10 cents. A true gallon of gasoline was 25 cents, and we're talking gallons. And a house in downtown Vancouver was about $14,000. Couldn't afford it then, can't afford it now. So that was very good wages. And I was just I was a sampler, the lowest job. Cost me $20 a month to live in the bunkhouse. I still had to worry about my own food, but that was it. So it was a great place to work. I mean, you made good money. Everybody made good money. The miner in 1965 was making $2.35, 37.5 cents an hour, with an opportunity of bonus between $10 and $30 a day, depending on footage broke or tonnage moved. So you could double your wages. Your housing was all subsidized. So you really did very well. And a lot of them have settled in Vancouver, or in Squamish. This was, like Diane was saying, the company was really good to the people. They wanted to keep them here. We actually started a car club in Squamish. They supplied whatever we needed. They gave us a clubhouse that we fixed up. It was in the old town site. It was a carpenter shop. We had it, and we did it. Unfortunately, it burnt down. We lost 37 cars. But, yeah, it was pretty sad for us guys. But there it is. That's what you guys actually see today. This is actually Jack Anderson and Barney Greenley. Barney Greenley was the manager when I came here, so in 1965. And he made big changes to Britannia. He wanted everything to look really nice. So if you were living in a house there and you wanted to paint the house, they would supply the paint. If you wanted to fix up the yard, they would give you whatever you needed. You had to do the labor, but they gave you whatever you wanted. And they actually got an award for beautiful, everything. Jack Anderson, very good friend of mine, became the manager later on. Great guy to work for. School, or church, that's still there. It's actually the post office in Squamish, or in Britannia now. That's the church. Interesting thing about this church. One side was Catholic, One side was Protestant. We have a wall in the middle. I don't know if they had services at the same time, but they had their own entrances. And I'm thinking that this is the Catholic side, and this is the Protestant, just by the crosses that are on it. But they had all the services. I don't know, some of you might be old enough for this. The old Chatterbox Cafe and McGregor's store. When the company store burnt down, and of course when the road went through, people didn't have to use the store anymore. So now you can go to town and buy whatever you want. So there still was a store at Britannia. That was McGregor's store and the Chatterbox Cafe, and you could eat there. A lot of guys did. These are all my buddies' cars, I know. But anyway, so that's where that was a hangout for us younger fellas. But this is what the facilities are here. And there actually was a BA gas station just right there too. And it was still, like Diane said, when the road came, it didn't really lose all the community feeling to it. There was still a community feeling there. Because if you went to a dance, everybody went, regardless of age. Everybody danced with everybody. And of course you can walk home because, you know, it's not very far at all. Bunkhouses, this is what I lived in, that's the York bunkhouses. We had 2 bunkhouses for single men, one was called the Royal Apartments. There actually is 3 bunkhouses there. One of them was made into our engineering office, geology office. Because Britannia was founded by basically New York money, because you have to remember that in the early days, where was all the money? New York Stock Exchange. So because it was all New York invested money in Britannia, they named their bunkhouses after New York hotels. So we have the Metropolitan, this is the York, and the Ritz. And those bunkhouses are still there today.
And there's a Savoy as well.
And the Savoy. Well, we had the Royal Apartments. Again, here's a picture of Britannia, and this is pretty close to, I'm going to say, yeah, because they're building the road, so this would be mid to late 60s. So here's the administration building, that was the access to it. This building is still here, that is our office building, that's the engineering office. The garage, the mill. Community center, where all the dances were held, was here. We had a theater. School. And this was the guest house. And our bank was right there, and that is actually in the Burnaby Museum. Our bank that was at Britannia.
Just before you go, this building here, if you've been through the museum lately, our main visitor centre, the copper-clad one, was the old garage, so that's this building there that was repurposed.
And this is still here, and that's our little cafe now. Ladies working at that. You're right. You're right. Not this one. This one.
Okay.
Women weren't allowed to work in the mine. They could work on surface, but they couldn't work in the mine. Even up to 1974. You had to be male and 18. But they did work in the offices, and yes, that is my wife. I said I would never date anybody I worked with. Never. Because you never know if it doesn't work out, you still have to work with them. So, well, I dated, so I ended up marrying her, and 47 years later, we're still married.
But are you working?
And there's a young me right there.
Who's that handsome fella?
He actually had hair. I blame that on the hard hats, but it's not really true. My father walked through that door, you'd say, oh, that's him. Again, these are the office staff workers, and yes, that's my wife on the end there. Last shift. So this was the last shift. And these are actually the cars that we went underground in. These are 40-man cars. You sat back to back. Your travel in was anywhere from 35 to 40 minutes, 45 minutes long. So and nobody turned the lights on, so you had your little nap. But your working time was only 8 hours. So it's 8 hours from portal to portal. So the entrance to the mine is called a portal. If you went in at 8 o'clock in the morning, you came out at 4 o'clock, no overtime. Reason being, all blasting was done at the end of the shift so that everybody was out of the mine when the smoke was going through. So you cleaned everything up. And this is the last shift. Some of you might remember. The old concentrate sheds that were along. This is where we stored all our concentrate. The tailings, at Britannia we were fairly fortunate. We were able to sell everything, even our waste. Because they made actual cement powder of it. And a lot of the foreshore that you see here was filled up by the tailings, and they just kept going out, and so that's how Britannia actually got to get bigger, part of the road. But we sold everything. Everything that came out of that mine was sold. So we were fairly fortunate. In the early days, yes, it was dumped into the ocean, safest place for it. No, it is. It's serious. If you don't get air into it, it's safe. If you get air and water together, that's when it becomes toxic. And of course, this is the museum today. And of course, there's a nice area of what it looks like today. But this is probably what you. So here we are at Britannia, and that's the mill. This tunnel right here is our main tunnel. That's our longest tunnel. That's 8 kilometers, 5 miles. Our first working area was about 1.5 kilometers in. So this is, when I first came here, this wasn't here. They hadn't discovered that yet. This was the first one. That's 2 miles from the entrance. Then we went down 2,000 feet. This well was 60 to 100 feet below the top of the mountain. So we're a mile deep. It is 2,000 feet or 600 meters below sea level. But it is a very dry mine. It did not get wet in here. The only water was what we produced by our drilling or mucking. And it was nice, comfortable 72 degrees at that, 22 Fahrenheit. Trouble was, it was 90% humidity. Great for losing weight and hangovers, but tough to work in. Lots of salt pills, lots of water. And you could not drink the water in this mine because of the fact that it's toxic, and we'll talk about it after. But this is what it looked like. So this is where they started, at the very top of the mountain, and slowly worked their way down. Now this level here, this 2200 level, that is where the town site was at Mount Shear. So that went straight out to that town site. So as they were working down, the camps were all here, but as they got down, that main town site, so now this became the main tunnel. And so the men would come in and go off to their work spots. And these are shafts or elevators, so that's how we got up and down. And anything from the bottom had buckets on the shafts, and everything was pulled to the surface. Again, we let gravity do all of the work for us. And in the early days, they actually pushed this 2700 tunnel through, and they put a crusher here and crushed all the rock and then took it out to the mill instead of down. And then slowly as they got lower, now all of a sudden you want that gravity to work for you, they push this main line all the way through. And again, this is an aerial on the top of it. So here we are at Britannia. There's the Mount Shear town site. The road coming up. There is a road now. And it actually goes right up into the Jane Basin. The actual mining itself takes place like this. It's just a very narrow band of mineral. And I've got a piece of what we actually mined here. It's called chalcopyrite, copper sulphide. It's basically 28% copper, 2% iron, and 70% sulfur. And that's why it has the color that it has. Now the only way you get the copper out of this is this has to go to a smelter. We never got pure copper at Britannia. What we did is we concentrated it because over the life of the mine, we averaged 1.5%. So what we want to do now is we want to concentrate it. So when we used to send the concentrate to the smelters to be processed, it was 90%, 95% chalcopyrite. So it's still that, but only we've got rid of most of the waste. The smelter will then cook everything out, and it will get all the minerals that are in there. Now, we did get other minerals besides copper out of there. We did get lead, zinc, cadmium, gold, and silver. But those are all byproducts. Those weren't the main thing. Copper was number one. They had camps scattered around the top. The Jane Basin, where the original town site, or camp was there. But they had the Empress Camp, the Beta Camp, Victoria Camp, and Barber Camp. The Victoria Camp actually had a bowling alley up there, because the men were there. The only thing it didn't have was women. It had everything but men. And I have been to the Beta Camp just recently. But you have to get permission. Sorry, this is still considered an active mining area. It's 25,000 acres. So to get through, you have to theoretically go through the mines Department of Mines. To get there. We built dams because we had our own powerhouses. We generated our own power. These dams have now been blown out. I'll tell you a funny story about that in a minute. But we had a powerhouse at Mount Cheer, and we had a powerhouse down at the beach. We generated, if we were running full bore, we could generate 75% of our own power. That included the town site, that included everything. We could generate our own power. And that town, and this town site, or that powerhouse was dismantled. This one here was running until '92 when it had a fire, and it burned down. Rumor has it a raccoon ate the insulation off the wires and cooked everything. It was an unmanned powerhouse at the time. But this is what it looks like now. All right, Diane. Now I've brought a few samples up here for things. Early days, this was our house. This is a carbide light, and they will show you this when you come to the museum, how the carbide light works. Basically, calcium carbide in the bottom, which is a man-made product, looks like a gray rock. You just add water, you strike it, forms a flame. This is a larger scale. This probably would have been somebody working, a little bit different, same idea. Carbide in the bottom, water drips in, forms acetylene gas, you light it, and you have your light. In the early days, it was candles. This is what it was like when I came to Britannia. This is your belt, your light, and your hard hat. The company supplied that. You had to worry about everything else. You bought your own boots, you bought your own gloves. Nowadays, it's a little bit different. And you guys have all heard about canaries in the mine, right? Mm-hmm. Canaries are in there because they would squawk when the oxygen levels got low. They were also good for if there was methane gas, mainly in the coal mines. We never had to worry about toxic gases in Britannia. The only gases you had to worry about was what we produced from blasting. This is what they came up with instead of the canary. This is called a wolf safety lamp, or Davy light. In the English, it's called Davy light. Germans call it a wolf safety lamp. Basically naphtha or cat fuel at the bottom. It is an enclosed, sealed unit. A little flame will come up. As you're going into an area, you will have that in front of you. If the flame starts to go down, that means the oxygen levels are getting low. If you're going in and the oxygen levels are fine, but all of a sudden there's a big blue cap above the flame, that means you're going into an explosive atmosphere. It will blow up inside here, but it will not blow up outside. So again, but you're going out. You're not staying. So this is some of the safety stuff. And safety got better as we came along. In '65, the only hearing protection we had in those days was cotton batting and little rubber plugs. That was it. It was hard enough to get them in to wear hard hats. We started a mandatory eye protection because the men are using drills. Even though we're using water, rocks coming at you, they didn't want to wear them. So they popped the lenses out and just wear the frames. There was a reason for it. All the mud and crud was getting on it. You and us, like, I mean, any of us wear glasses. When you get a change in temperature too, you can't see nothing, and, you know, I don't care what you can add millions of different kinds of chemicals on there to make it not, you still get frustrated. But that's it. Now, is there any questions?
You said that,
Yes.
excuse my voice, you had a trolley for bringing the
Yep.
coal or whatever.
Yep.
How could you do that on such a steep incline?
That incline was 20 degrees. Yeah.
I know I was gonna get
That incline was 20 degrees, and it was, it went 600 meters, 2,000 feet. And they had basically a 2-inch cable and hooked onto it. And that's actually how the people got to, how you got to the town site originally. How are we doing here?
I was gonna bring up the environmental one.
Okay, here we go. So, this road went in later. To get to that town site up there, you walked up 364 stairs. You got on an incline railway at 20 degrees and you went up the mountainside 2,000 feet. And then you caught a trolley line that went into the town site. That is the only way you could get in there, 45 minutes a day. So you didn't, and there was competitions between the two places. They had a basketball team, these guys had a basketball. They had a swim team, these guys had a swim team. Because both town sites were identical. They both had hospitals, they both had everything. Except, they had a high school, these guys didn't. They had an elementary school, but not a high school. So every day, if you were going to high school, you walked up 364 stairs, you went up on that incline railing, standing up. No cover, rain or shine. And then you went into school. The mine shut down in '74, and it shut down because of economics. The price of copper was very low. The ore reserves were shrinking. So what mineral they had in the mountain was getting smaller. And the wages and the political situation was changing. So that pretty well spilled the end of the mine. Now, would they start up today? The answer is no. They have done studies, but the costs outweigh the benefits. When we shut down, they figured they had 1.5 years of ore reserves left. So this is what they knew was in the mountainside. But we were getting deeper and deeper, and of course the costs were rising. And in 1974, wages jumped from what we used to argue about 5 cents an hour for wages, went from to $5 an hour. It just went from there. So of course, and a lot of people suffered over that. Most of the mines in BC suffered over that. Yes, sir. For many
Did you
years.
notice your safety procedures getting better?
Yes.
From when you started to when you're...
Yes.
And
Mining
do
industry
it for
has.
yourself?
Mining industry has. They learn by their mistakes.
Yeah.
There was a major fire at a sunshine mine in Kellogg, Idaho, and I was still working at Britannia. I was on call for that one because I was in the mine rescue team. They had a major fire. Fire is the biggest thing in a hard rock mine. It's the only major death because you're sucking air in, and the fire is taking the air. And if you're working on the other side of the fire, you're getting nothing but carbon monoxide. So we learned from that because there was a lot of men lost their life at Kellogg, Idaho. We built rescue chambers underground. So we would build chambers that could be sealed with oxygen, food, and water for men for 12 days. 10 men for 12 days. 24 days. So yeah, they learn by our mistakes. Now, because of that, even in today, the men working underground all carry respirators. These are for carbon monoxide. They're not oxygen containers, but they are for carbon monoxide.
Like scrubbers?
Kind of. What it does is it takes the monoxide and you can still breathe the air. Because you can have proper air,
Yeah.
but monoxide, your lungs will take the monoxide over the oxygen. So what you do is you can be in a perfectly healthy atmosphere and die. So yes, they have those. But yeah, like a scrubber, same idea.
And did you have some kind of tag system to make sure everyone was out before you blasted?
Yes.
And did that get better?
Oh yeah, oh no, it was really good. Of course, with us going in the tunnel and out the tunnel, we also had a shift boss. To be a boss underground, you have to have all these tickets. That shift boss is responsible for his crew. So if I have a crew, say this is my crew here. I'm sitting at the top of the shaft when we came up, and I'm counting my men. Also, when you went in the morning, and when you came out at night, you had a tag that you moved from in to out, and that matched the number on your light. So if your tag hadn't been moved over, but your light was there, then they knew you were out. Because you didn't take anybody else's light, you had your own. If your light wasn't there, and your tag was moved over, then they knew something was wrong. But at Britannia, we didn't have that problem where everybody came up the shaft and then ran out. We came up and then we had to get on the train. So the foreman was counting his crew as we were going out. So we were a little bit different than some of the places. Some of the places, when they came up from the elevator, they just scattered. All right.
I just want to sort of touch on the environmental side of it, because that's been a huge part of Britannia's story, and you may well have heard of it. So, I'm just going to get one of the post-closure ones. So, the ore in the mountain is what's called a volcanogenic massive sulphide. It's massive sulphide, so copper sulphide, iron sulphide, zinc sulphide, lead sulphide. These are all minerals which give us the metals we want. They were also on the surface. When those minerals react with a specific type of bacteria and air and water, the chemical reaction gives you sulfuric acid, dissolved metals, and this understandably is very toxic to the environment. Even before the mine was there, this was a natural process that's happening. It's called acid rock drainage. The mineralized, there was mineralized rock on the surface, so this was happening, and so Britannia Creek was essentially a dead creek. When you drill all these tunnels, you give much more of a surface area for this chemical reaction to happen, and that's what happened at Britannia. We live in a wet climate. We live in the rainforest, so all the snow melt, all the rain was coming down through the fissures in the rock, through the tunnels, and it was creating this toxic soup that had dissolved copper, dissolved aluminum, iron, zinc, lead, everything, and that was flowing down through the mine, out through the portals, and into the creeks and into Howe Sound. Copper in particular, for example, is highly toxic to fish. So throughout the mine's life, and particularly after the mine closed, when there was no efforts to be remediating it, it created what was essentially a dead zone around Britannia Creek. It left this hideous staining all around the shoreline. There was no life. What's interesting is that when the mine closed, Anaconda met the environmental regulations of the day. So they put in place everything that government said, you need to do this to mitigate the risk. So that was all put in place, but the owners that took over, they were not very great landlords, shall we say, and so they didn't maintain those systems, and they started to break down. The outflow pipe that was put down below the intertidal zone started to degrade. Up in the Mount Shear town site, the main portal there at the 2200, there was a dam in place. That dam failed, so all the toxic mine water started to run out and into Britannia Creek higher up. So what it created was a dead zone in the creeks, contaminated soils, and a dead zone around the intertidal zone. And a researcher in subsequent years was working on this, and he identified Britannia as the worst single point source of metal discharge into a marine environment in North America.
Wow.
It was tragic. But back in the 90s, the community started to kind of lobby the government, say you have to do something about this. And so over the next 10, 15 to 20 years, between environmentalists, researchers, the community, lobbied hard, and finally in 2001 things started to change. There was a plug put in place at the 2200 portal, so that portal halfway up the mountainside, to stop excuse me, the toxic water flowing out and into Britannia Creek. $30 million was secured from industry to help towards remediation efforts, so the contaminated soils were cleared up. But what was most important is that a water treatment plant was put in place. Now, as the crow flies, it actually just sits next to Mill 3 today. And so if I go back to, yeah, I'm just going to go back to the main one.
Oh, right.
Yeah, there.
Just about there.
There. So what happens today is the mine is basically used as a reservoir for all the polluted water. So that rainwater snowmelt is still going through all the cracks, still going through all the tunnels, but it's stored in the mine in all the tunnels. And the water treatment plant sits about here, just next to what's called the 4100 tunnel. And there's a big cement plug in there as well, and a pipe. And so all that water goes from that pipe to this water treatment plant, and it treats the water. It removes the acidity, so it neutralizes the water with lime, and it also uses a polymer which basically precipitates the metals and takes them out, and it's this sludge, this brown sludge that's all the metals, and so they're sending clean water out into Howe Sound. And so that's been operating since 2005. Twice a year what they do is they have the sludge, they store it at the water treatment plant, and then twice a year in dump trucks they drive it all the way up to the Jane Basin and they put it in and they dump it there and they're storing it up there. Now the sludge is in the oxide form, so it's not going to re-pollute, and they're also helping to cap the basin as well to stop less and less water. Now because this is a natural process and because there's still mineralization in the mine, this water treatment plant is going to have to run basically in perpetuity. But what has happened is since it's been operating, life is starting to come back. So we've got sea stars and all sorts of, basically the intertidal zone has come back to life. We've had salmon in the creek, trout seen in the creek for the first time in possibly ever, but certainly since the mine has been operating. And so what's happened is it's taken a mine site which was basically an embarrassment to the mining industry, and it's turned it on its head and it's turned it into a remediated site, a site that the government and the industry is proud about, to say, look, this is what we can do. We can learn from the past. We can take these contaminated lands with our innovation and technology. We can remediate it and fix things and see things come back. And so from this dead zone around Britannia, which really impacted the whole of Howe Sound, that's contributed to the orcas and the whales and everything else coming back into Howe Sound. So it's been quite a journey that Britannia's been on.
And continuing what Diane's saying is that now we did not have this problem when the mine was operating because we mined the water. As she was telling you, because when air and water comes in contact with sulfur, it forms sulfuric acid. Drops the pH of the water from 7 down to 3.8. That's like drinking vinegar. But that 3.8, all minerals will dissolve in it. So you can have a perfectly clear glass of water that is completely toxic. Well, and there's also a little bacteria in there. He likes to eat mineral. This is a good little bacteria. So this little bacteria, think of him as a Pac-Man. He'd be going through the mine, pick up a copper molecule, and it's in his mouth. Well, what we found is that if you put tin cans, pop cans, iron in front of this, it likes iron more than it likes copper. So it'll come along, come across a piece of iron, eat the iron and spit out the copper. So we used to have leaching ponds here and up there. We used to take all our scrap steel. We used to buy pop cans and tin cans by the tons. We used to fill these things up. All the water would come through. Eat those pop cans up into nothing and leave the copper behind. Now the water coming out was very brown, but like Diane says, it changed it. The copper was the bad guy. So we would mine the water. Very cheap way to do it. One man doing it, 99% copper. That's what you were getting. It's amazing. It's called leaching or precipitating. And we had one plant here and one plant up there. And we did fish in the creeks. Anything above this level was fishable. Anything below that, no fish. But we used to fish out front and catch salmon. So there was definitely leaching going in, but it did.
And what Marshall was saying earlier about the tailings being dumped offshore, and that's the best place for it, that is true, is because you're removing the oxygen and the bacteria is not there. And what has also happened is because with Howe Sound being glacial fed, it's been covered up by silt as well. So it's buried, it's out of the way, and it can't pollute.
There's
Whereas
40
if-
million tons out there.
Whereas if that
Yeah.
had been dumped on land, different story.
How did they get all the heavy equipment up to the top of that?
Horse, pack, take it apart, and we built a lot up there because we had our own foundries. But you're right, that's the only way you get it. They took a piano up to one of the houses up there, and we have that piano, went through the mine. So it went in, went up the cage, and they took it up through. And that's how they got it up there.
How much does it cost to fix it?
Well, I don't know. It was sort of like if you were living in Britannia, and especially in those days when you had to do that. If you quit and she decided to work, so she goes and works there, she may have a furnished house. It may not be all the same kind of dishes because 3 or 4 people have had that house before them. Nobody took an old chair back out with you because it cost too much to move it out. So you would end up with all kinds of, 5 dishes, but none of them matched. That's right. Well, that's basically how I started out. I had 2 dishes and when you get married there. But anyway, yeah. So you inherited, unless it was an heirloom that you really wanted, it all stayed up there. Yes?
One of your, just going back quite a ways, on one of your slides was showing the lakes that stored water for
Yes.
your hydro project.
Yes.
You said there was some sort of an interesting story
Oh.
there about releasing it,
Okay.
and I've just been on
Oh, sorry.
pins and needles ever
All
since.
right. What happened was the government decided that these dams weren't adequate. They could blow one day and then we'd have a disaster. So they brought in the professionals. And they decided that what they'd do is they would drill a small hole and just let the water come out easy. And there is actually a video on one of the public stations on how it happened. Anyway, they did their thing and blew the little hole, not realizing that these dams weren't reinforced or anything like that. They were just dams. Well, of course, the little hole became a big hole. Came down the mountainside and wiped out the townsite. Down in the beginning, and there's pictures of, nobody was around because they knew about it, but it still come through and smashed houses and garbage. They would have been farther ahead to leave the dams alone. They were so full of silt that all it was just spilling over the top.
Yeah.
It would never have really caused any problems. I've been up to those dams, so I know. Anyway, any more questions? Just tell them about the museum today and your new exhibit.
Yeah,
What's
so
going to happen?
the museum's been undergone a lot of changes in the last recent years. In 2010, we changed from the BC Museum of Mining, became the Britannia Mine Museum, and we'd undergone $15 million of infrastructure funding and rehabilitation of the mill, and new exhibits. And then more recently we've seen further changes. So there's, we have a new exhibit that looks at Howe Sound and the impact of mining on the environment. And that from May next year we'll be having a new show in the mill, which we want to bring the mill back to life. So it'll be a sound and special effects show that should be fun. And there's some scary fun in there as well. So
It will show you exactly what the mill
Yes.
did.
bring the mill back to life.
Well,
So May next year.
we really appreciate you guys making the trip up here.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. We'll all have to go down.
Yeah,
for a tour.
Yes,
Yeah.
you should.
And it's a National Historic Site now, right?
Yes.
Yeah, 1988. It was the mill building that was designated for its contribution to Canadian economy.
If you've never been in the mill building, you should, because if you just stand at the bottom of the stairway, 374 stairs at a 45-degree angle. Straight up. And that's how you got to work. There is no elevators now. And that is 210 feet high.